2020 will undoubtedly go down in history as a year which changed the course of the world forever. Its global impact can't be ignored, and we've seen firsthand how it's caused certain industries to thrive and others to absolutely crumble. In this video, I want to have a dive into this a little and discuss some of the impacts I see for us in the near future. There are some important points I feel we should keep in mind with regards to how the pandemic will impact not just our professional development, but also our personal development going forward. Let's start with some of the positives and probably one of the most obvious topics, remote working. Throughout the course of the pandemic, I engaged with a lot of different people about this and generally found there was a good balance between people that really hated not being able to go into the office and some that absolutely loved it. The one thing I feel most people won't argue with is that remote working in general allows for greater flexibility. Being able to work largely in your own space without perhaps your boss peering over your shoulder, you get this kind of newfound freedom to work at your own pace. This is something which I honestly don't feel like will change too much, and I actually see companies that do survive the pandemic wanting to adopt a more flexible approach to remote working. For employees, I think this could open up a world of opportunities as it potentially means our jobs are no longer limited by our location. For those of you that haven't read it, I'd highly recommend checking out a book called The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. This idea of remote working is one of the key principles in unlocking freedom in our lives by being location independent. On the flip side, businesses that survived the pandemic would have been forced to have all, if not the majority, of their workforce work remotely. I think what a lot of businesses will realize over this time is that whilst they may not have had a choice in this, some businesses were largely able to operate just fine and may come to the conclusion that actually paying premium amounts for office space is not really necessary. Without the large fixed overhead every month, it's going to allow businesses to drop their monthly costs and help supplement other areas of the business which may need it more. There is also the potential for businesses to start looking for employees abroad, whereby maybe the average salaries are a lot lower for a similar level of talent. Again, providing them with greater flexibility in terms of running costs for their business. Whilst flexibility seemingly has its positives for both businesses and employees, there are naturally some downsides too. Firstly, as amazing as the tools, platforms, and software that are currently available to help remote working are, I haven't found anything available yet that can truly replace an in-person meeting when it needs to be done at scale. I think one-to-one meetings are far more replaceable remotely, but scale up the size of this and group discussions are largely impossible without speaking over someone. I'm sure the majority of you have experienced this with the weekly Zoom calls with family or friends, and over, of course, the infamous quizzes during lockdown. On top of this, there's an element of accountability when it comes to projects and tasks which is most definitely harder to do when you're trying to do them remotely. Secondly, we can't ignore the potential economic knock-on impacts from the weaker demand in office space. Commercial space prices are likely to fall, as well as potentially demand for housing. London, for example, may have previously had very attractive jobs, which drove people wanting to take those roles having to live in and around London. With remote working growing to be the new normal, people may not need to be geographically located close to London to fill that same role. This will have a knock-on impact in terms of the demand for housing in the near future. Third, whilst I mentioned flexibility for remote working as positives as it will open up more job opportunities, this also comes with a downside because you need to consider the competition for each role that you may be facing. We now may be fighting for jobs with those who are just as highly skilled in places all over the world. Lastly, and I think this has been a big one which people have come to realize, the blur between the work-life balance. When your home environment now becomes doubled up as a work environment, this has a big toll on our ability to stop working, switch off, and then unwind. This could also go the other way around. We find our productivity during working hours has dropped as we're trying to work in an environment which we're used to relaxing in. These are all things to consider about what our futures may hold for us. Overall, whether the change is good or bad is, I guess, subject to opinion, But I think the thing that we can't ignore is that change is coming. In our world, I find that there is rarely an option to stay still. You're either adapting with the times or you're being left behind. If you're not moving ahead, but the rest of the world is, it still results in you moving backwards. In the same way businesses are currently being forced to adapt to the impact of the pandemic, we need to ensure that we're doing the same. I personally see the future being a hybrid between our old way of work and a new normal. With this in mind, take the time to proactively think about how your routines will subsequently need to change and adapt going forward. Here are a few questions to ask yourself based on what we've touched on in this video. Are there any other jobs or companies globally which I could be working for that would provide me with greater benefits than my current role? What skills or industries will be invaluable in the future, and how can I work on becoming better in these areas to ensure I'm valuable in the long term? Are there things I can invest in to make my home or work environment better suited to a lifestyle where remote working may be beneficial? Lastly, with remote working being an option, is there somewhere I could move to that would allow for a greater quality of life with cheaper living expenses? A few final tips from my side. Firstly, try and leave your home at least once a day, even for a walk. Maybe try and do this in the morning prior to starting your workday to replace what would have been your morning commute. Secondly, make an effort to take advantage of modern day technology and reach out to family and friends. Third, create work environments and play environments in your house. Don't let these cross over. Hide your laptop when you're done with work and don't work from your bed, for example. And lastly, take this a step further. Create separations between work devices and leisure devices. For example, your phone and your laptop. It doesn't take much for a work email to ruin your evening. Turn off your notifications once you're clocked off, or use a different device entirely if you have access to that. In most cases, what I'm trying to get at here is that we want to be proactive instead of reactive. There are a lot of things outside of our control at the moment, and it's safe to say that COVID-19 caught the vast majority of the world off guard. We've had a peek now at what the future may hold. It's up to us to make informed decisions and planning at how we can best manage our personal and professional development for the future. As always, I hope this has given you something to think about, and I look forward to catching you in the next video.